what are the kind of files that we can talk about purging? And in the PBS system, the files themselves can sometimes have multiple functions, but somewhat arbitrarily I've chopped up the kinds of files into 4 kinds. We have transaction files. These are the kind of files that you're very familiar with in accounts payable. When we're entering vouchers, we do an entry, we do an edit list, and then we do a post. That's a transaction file. In accounts receivable, for example, there's miscellaneous charges where we do an enter and we run an edit list on our invoice summaries that we've just entered, and then we post them to create open accounts receivable. The invoicing cycle in accounts receivable is rather similar, except that the transaction file there lasts a little bit longer because we can put invoices in, leave them for some time, and then later on print the invoices and post them. Those are all kind of samples of transaction files. In payroll, the time worked function is an example of a transaction file where we're doing our weekly or semi-monthly or monthly payroll transactions. Same deal with in inventory when we are doing monthly sets of transfers between different warehouses or doing receivings for vendor receipts. All of those are samples of the transaction files. Now, the reason I put this first is simply that we don't have to worry about purging of transaction files. It's in the nature of the PBS transaction file that when you've run it through the edit list, decided that this is what you want, and then post it, part of the posting process is to go back and get rid of the transaction file itself. This is a fail-safe to make sure that you don't double post by accident. We get rid of those transactions so there's no possibility of double dipping. So although for completeness I wanted to have the transaction files in here, there's really nothing we need to do about them. They're self-sustaining. They take care of themselves. Master and code files I'll be touching on at the end, but by and large the maintenance function, the purging function is part of the maintenance function. And by that I mean, generally speaking, you're going to be adding new customers, new vendors, new items. Periodically, you will want to review your customers and vendors to see people, for example, that you haven't dealt with or invoiced in 3 years or 7 years or whatever the number is, and maybe you want to get rid of them. For each of those cases, basically there is a process which is documented in the AR or the AP manual whereby you go through and you have to delete history from these people, and then you manually delete one customer or manually delete one vendor. So you're going through a process. And so this kind of maintenance function is not really purging in the sense that we're talking about. It's really a matter of going in and treating a small range of customers or an individual customer to some special processing which will ultimately simply get rid of and allow you to delete that customer. It's not a purging process, really. So having talked about those first two to kind of get them out of the way, we can now hit on the two ones where we really are concerned about purging. And the first one are the open item files. The open item files are like the accounts payable and accounts receivable open item files. They're not transaction files because they actually receive the transactions. They hold data for some extended period of time, and at the end of that period of time, whether it's by virtue of cashing out on receiving of an invoice from a customer or paying a check, the data in there now comes to some sort of zero value. That is, we don't have anything more that this customer owes us, or we don't owe our vendors anything more. At that point, we may want to keep it, and we'll be talking about that, or we may want to purge those items. The system in all cases has a fail-safe so that you cannot purge open items from any of the subsystems. You can't purge open items that have not been either completely received against or purged or whatever is the appropriate transaction. So what that means is that you can't accidentally purge a partially paid voucher. it won't be purged. You can't partially pay. You can't purge a partially paid a customer who is only partially paid for an invoice. So the issue there with the open item files is really, when do I do it and for how far back? And we'll be talking about that. The last category are history files, and this is really where we talk about purging as a big deal, because history files just accumulate and accumulate. I'm going through a conversion right now with a customer who has had real world and is converting to PBS, and we're bringing forward, in effect, data coming from the 1990s. That's a lot of data, and probably a lot of useless data, and that probably means some purging should have been going on. This is mainly the history files, and what's happening is, in this particular case, the conversion is costing a lot more time simply because we're sitting there watching 500,000 records be read off the real-world system and built into the PBS system. To do what? Well, to sit there and really not be referenced. So this is a case at some point somebody needs to sit down and do some purging to get rid of that data. Again, the issue of when and how much is what we want to concentrate on. And that's where I want to try and take the sting out of this cycle.